This presentation is on social skills and identifying concerns and building skills for children in kindergarten through 12th grade. My name is Mel and I am a licensed professional counselor with Syntero. So first we're going to talk about what normal social development looks like as defined by the CDC. This information is all pulled from their website. So some relevant skills that children ages 3 through 5 should be showing is the ability to show affection. They should be exploring the world around them and learning to play with other children. By the time the children are in middle childhood or ages 6 through 8, they develop the ability to pay more attention to friendships and teamwork. They want to be liked and accepted by friends. They develop more confidence in their schoolwork, their friendships, and sports. They learn better ways to describe their experiences and talk about their thoughts and feelings. And this piece, being able to talk more to describe what they're thinking and what they're feeling is really what I do and where what I do comes in as a counselor, because this ability that children develop between ages 6 and 8 is what allows them to engage with a counselor when that's necessary. They also during this time have less focus on themselves and begin to develop more concern for others. Social development in pre-adolescence or ages 9 through 11 involves beginning to form stronger and more complex friendships, especially with the same sex. And these same-sex relationships are important later in life, according to many experts who study social development among children. They also begin to experience more peer pressure. They become more independent from their family and they begin to see the point of view of others more clearly. They also have an increased attention span. So these last two things, beginning to take another person's point of view and also an increased attention span, makes children of this age more likely and more able to have sustained conversations with friends and peers. So that's what we're seeing develop during this time, is those longer, more involved conversations with others around them. Young teens, ages 12 through 14, again, we are still referencing the CDC. They begin to show more concern about their body image, looks, and clothes. And these things can impact their social connection, how a child feels in relation to others, their confidence when interacting with peers, etc., can all be impacted by how they feel about themselves and where they think they stand in kind of the social status among their peers. Also, during this 12 to 14 age range, children begin to show more interest in and influence by their peer group. They have an increased ability to express their feelings through talking, and this ability allows them to communicate with peers too, like we talked about with younger children, how they're beginning to have more sustained conversations, more in-depth conversations. This just continues to increase in young teens, so they should have more of an ability to have a longer conversation and to be able to resolve conflicts through talking and collaboration, rather than fights or things like that may be more common among younger children who haven't developed the social skills that the older children have. During this time, also students become more independent and they develop their own personality and interests. Teenagers, ages 15 through 17, we should see them developing a more clear sense of self. They should be preparing for independence and becoming more responsible. An over-reliance on parents during this age could indicate that a child does have maybe some problems with social skills or developing relationships with same age peers. During this time, they are preparing to leave the home typically, and so that increased independence and increased responsibility becomes more important. They also during this time have more interest in romantic and sexual relationships, and they tend to spend less time with parents and more time with their friends. So having talked about what is kind of normal or what is typical for students at all of those different ages, now we're going to transition and talk about some signs that there may be problems. Some examples of possible problems could be when a child makes little or no eye contact. This is at any age. All of these possible problems that we're going to talk about can be applied to any age. Doesn't engage or notice nonverbal social cues, and or lacks the understanding of non-written rules. So things like appropriate social distance, appropriate eye contact, taking turns when speaking. Some other examples of failure to adhere to a social norm would be interrupting, maybe making odd noises or gestures during a conversation, or making sounds while sitting in class at school, getting too close when talking to someone, an inappropriate volume of conversation. Maybe the child consistently speaks too quietly that they aren't heard, or too loudly for it to be appropriate for the situation. Also, things like poor hygiene could indicate that there are problems socially. Having few or no close friendships outside the family, or interacting with peers exclusively or almost exclusively online, and lacking face-to-face contacts. So seeing all friendships are online through games or social media rather than with people that your student actually sees in person. And a way that parents might assess these friendships for their child would be to ask yourself, is your child maybe being invited to events with friends? Do they have friends maybe who they visit their house, or who they want to come over to your house? If your child has a birthday party, can they think of a few friends who they would want to invite to that party? And also simply asking your child who their friends are at school is an easy way for parents to assess who their child is interacting with and if there are maybe some concerns in this area. More signs of possible problems. We've already mentioned poor hygiene. Examples of this: body odor, improper oral hygiene, maybe skin picking or scratching, just looking disheveled or unkept. All of these things could cause relational problems for children. Even if they would otherwise have good social skills, this can create a barrier between a child and their peers. Something also to note is that poor hygiene can be an indication of depression or not caring what others think to an unhealthy place. Could be an indication that further assessment may be needed by a mental health professional. Other signs of problems: frequent conflict with others, frequent changes in friend group. We expect to see from year to year some changes in friend group is normal, but making very frequent and rapid changes in friend groups, for example, if a child has a new best friend on Monday and by Friday they can't stand to be around each other, and your child has an entirely new friend group, and if this kind of behavior is a pattern, it could indicate that the child lacks the skills to resolve problems with others and instead just leaves the group and searches for new friends whenever there is a conflict. Other things like intentionally intimidating others, verbally or physically threatening a peer or a younger child, or angry or aggressive outbursts such as screaming, name-calling, threatening. All of these could indicate that the child hasn't learned appropriate coping skills to be able to regulate their emotions, and this can keep the child distant from others. Now, sometimes we do also see, particularly with older students, sometimes this behavior of being angry or aggressive could be seen as cool or desirable, or viewed by some as being strong to handle problems by expressing anger. Additional signs: a negative self-image, excessive comparison to others, or making self-deprecating remarks, self-isolation or avoidance of others, reluctance to engage in new activities or take risks due to fear of criticism or embarrassment, lacking assertiveness, or a heightened physiological response in social situations, such as sweating, dry mouth, or shaking. So feeling nervous to the point that there is a physical reaction when you're in a social situation. Also, I want to pause here to note that if your child meets all of these criteria, this could be an indication that they may need professional help for some of the social problems that they're experiencing. And now moving on to some practical tips that parents can use if they're noticing problems socially with their child. One is to ask your child to practice eye contact with you, and then gradually ask them to practice this with others. So this could be practicing eye contact with you, and once they're able to do that, ask them to practice making eye contact with one other person during their day, and then move up maybe to 3 times on a different day. It also can be helpful to ask your child to think of safe others who they would like to practice this with, and then make a plan for when it would be appropriate to practice this new skill. And we are going to come back to this multiple times in the rest of this presentation, is identifying safe others who the child could practice with, and then making a plan to practice. Another tip would be demonstrate appropriate social distance for your child for different social interactions. So how close is appropriate to give someone a hug versus when you're having a conversation with them. And then this also combined with teaching your child to ask for consent. So asking, may I give you a hug, or may I sit next to you? This can teach your child social skills with others, so it's appreciated by others, and asking for consent can take the mystery out of others' reactions. So imagine your child goes and sits in a seat that a peer was saving for another friend, and that peer becomes very upset because they had saved the seat. This could easily be misinterpreted by the child that this person doesn't want to sit with me, they don't want me sitting near them. Whereas in reality, the friend is upset because they were saving that seat, and by not gaining consent, your child would not have the opportunity to know the thoughts behind their peer's reaction. Another practical tip could be discussing the pros and cons of virtual friendships. If you're noticing a lot of virtual friendships with your child, so some of the pros could be that they can connect with a wider net of people. Maybe they enjoy the games that they're playing and they share common interests with those they're able to connect with. However, on the downside, by interacting exclusively virtually, the student may lack the social contacts necessary for a face-to-face environment. Different social skills are developed online than the ones that are needed for in-person interactions. So although it may be easier for a student to maybe discuss some topics behind a text or behind a screen, and they may feel more comfortable sharing digitally than they would in real life, both in positive and negative ways. They may also not really know who they're talking to. So discussing internet safety with students is very important. Things like never sharing your address or personal information, never saying or sending something that you wouldn't want to see. And exclusively having friendships online could deteriorate some of those skills that are necessary for in-person interactions, such as eye contact, pacing of conversation, tone and inflection, and appropriate social distance. A few more practical tips for parents is to brainstorm with your child what makes a good friend and what your child wants in a friend. So maybe it's someone who's honest or fun to be with or enjoys sports. And then encouraging your child to be the kind of friend that they're looking for. So encouraging your child to listen to others and respect other opinions, to always tell the truth, and asking them, are they the kind of person that they would look for in a friend? Some practical tips when conflict seems to be the main issue socially for a child. Is to help your child learn assertive versus aggressive behavior. And we're going to talk about this a lot more here in a few minutes. But using I statements and respecting others are examples of being assertive rather than aggressive. You can teach and demonstrate alternative responses to anger and frustration. So things like deep breathing, count to 10 before responding, take a break or a walk to calm down. Mindfulness and meditation are all examples we're going to come back to. Help your child identify trusted adults that they can ask for help when they can't handle a conflict on their own or when they need help calming down. So whether this at home, maybe as a parent at school, maybe choosing which teacher they would like to ask for help when they need assistance, are just some ways to help your child be able to manage those emotions when they're feeling angry. On the other hand, if social skills for your child tends to center more around nervousness, teaching and practicing calming skills to use when fearful or nervous around others, again, things like deep breathing, muscle relaxation, meditation, building confidence, and teaching assertive versus passive behavior, helping your child identify safe peers who they would like to begin a friendship with. So this, again, is where we're going to come back to making a plan and practicing your first interaction with that person who your child identifies that they would like to be friends with. So practicing maybe when they have an opportunity to see this peer, and then practice walking up to them, look for a common interest that the friend shares, and then ask them to join in a game or activity, are just some practical steps to initiating a friendship that may not be obvious to some children. Next, we're going to talk about assertiveness as promised. And so you'll see here several documents that you are free to use. These are open on the web, and my final slide has some links where you can find these worksheets. So assertiveness is a communication style that stands up for one's own needs and also respects the needs of others. So I like to phrase this with students: you're respecting yourself while also respecting the other person. So this is not being aggressive or angry. This is not being passive or letting others have whatever they want. So a few key points of assertiveness is respecting oneself, expressing thoughts and feelings calmly, plan what you're going to say, and then say no when you need to say no. Some examples of assertive communication are listed here, and these could be helpful to go over with students just to help them understand the concept of assertiveness more clearly. This is another worksheet explaining assertiveness that I like to use in my work with students. It shows at the top a teeter-totter of where passive communication is at one end and aggressive communication is at the other end. And I like to tell students that we all fall closer to one or the other, passive or aggressive, naturally. But what we want is to be assertive, which falls in the middle. So this involves talking and listening. This is compromising, standing up for oneself confidently, building your own self-esteem so that when you need to use those assertiveness skills, you have the self-esteem to be able to do that. And here are just a few more examples that can be used with students to practice assertiveness. I find that these examples are most appropriate for children in middle school and older. With younger children, often I will use this to explain assertiveness, and we call it mouse, monster, me. So we talk about the mouse is that passive response, the monster is the aggressive or angry response, and we'll talk about the drawbacks of both of those and how responding like a mouse or a monster, neither of those really gets us what we want and oftentimes gets us in trouble. So we talk about how the me, which is the assertive response, is really what we want to be. So things like finding a win-win and something that works for everyone, using manners and using I messages and I statements, which we'll talk about more again in a minute. I statements are statements that express how you feel without blaming others and also provide an explanation to the extent possible. So a formula that can be followed is I feel, and inserting an emotion word, when, and then explain the situation of when this comes up. A few examples that can be practiced typically with older children. And then here are a few examples to practice with younger children. And this actually adds an additional step to these I statements and asks children to say how they feel and what the situation is. And then also to ask for what they want or for what they need. So identifying what they would like to be different in the situation. Some coping and calming skills to practice with kids. Mindfulness is one that we tend to focus on a lot when we're doing counseling with students. It is just a state of non-judgmental awareness of what's happening in the moment, and this increases awareness of one's own thoughts, feelings, and senses. So the two main components of mindfulness are awareness, just noticing what's going on, and then acceptance. So not judging your feelings that you're having. So if you're feeling nervous, not judging that it's a negative thing, but just noticing and accepting, okay, I'm feeling nervous. Now, this is not accepting maybe negative things that happen that aren't okay. We want to say that really isn't okay and that shouldn't have happened. But accepting your own feelings about a situation as something that's okay and that you're allowed to have those feelings. So lots of benefits of mindfulness related to mental health as well as physical health. These are a few different ways to practice mindfulness. There's practicing meditation, taking a mindful walk and observing while you're out on this walk, just the things that you notice, the things that are around you. Doing a body scan, so paying attention to just the things that you feel physically in your body, just for a few moments to notice what's there. And again, we're not judging those feelings, we're just observing what is happening in our bodies. And then the five senses, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, can also be a distraction technique that students to use when they're in the middle of a distressing situation. So something maybe that's difficult to deal with, can use this and practice 5 things they can see, 4 things they can feel, 3 things they can hear. I do it, 2 things you can taste, and then 1 thing you can smell. And this is a way to just kind of bring us back to the present moment, even though there might be a lot of different things going on in our brains and in our bodies. Next is some mindfulness activity cards. And I am sorry, I'm not sure where I got these from, so I can't give appropriate credit, but this is not my original work. But these are just activity cards, primarily to use with younger kids, of a way to practice some of those skills and techniques that we've just talked about. This is a list, 50 ways to take a break. So examples of lots of different coping and calming skills the students could draw on when they feel like they need to calm down or maybe need to take a break from a situation. And just a couple more resources. This social skills graphic provides an explanation of some different categories of social skills, which I tend to find helpful maybe when you're noticing a problem, to identify kind of where those problems are or what category your child tends to be having problems in. Is it maybe just one aspect of social skills, whereas others are fine? Or are there several different categories or several different types of social skills that your child seems to be struggling with? This could also be turned into a game where the child gets to fill in the bubble once they practice a coping skill or once they've mastered that skill. This is our friendship circles that I often use with students, usually around middle school and up, although it is appropriate. It can be used with younger kids. And this just helps kids understand that there are different levels of friendship and that those are okay. So there are people who are going to be closer to the child, family, maybe best friends. And then there are also people who are going to be in those green and yellow circles who are friends or maybe even an acquaintance, someone that your child knows and interacts with, but isn't a close friend. So I will talk with students who are maybe having some trouble with friendships and explain that it's okay for people to move between different circles. Some people may become a closer friend and may move from the yellow circle into the green circle, and that's awesome when that happens. But at the same time, because of different circumstances, a friend may move from the green circle where maybe you used to be good friends, and they may move out into the yellow circle where now there's someone you know and you're okay with each other, but just not as close as you used to be. And that's something that's natural and normal, and can be expected, and that's okay. Here are, as promised, just a few of those resources for some of those worksheets that we looked at today. And thank you so much for watching this presentation put out by Syntero. You will see a link to a form that you can use to get in contact with us. And there's also a Q&A in the description of this video. Thank you so much for joining us today.